For a long time now, the Red Death had ravaged the entire country. There had never been a plague so deadly, so hideous. Blood was both its signature and its phone red, and terrifying. It began with sharp, sudden pains, followed by a swift loss of consciousness. Then came the bleeding profuse, unstoppable from every pore. Soon after, the body began to decay. Crimson blotches appeared on the skin, especially on the face, marking the victim as someone to be avoided, cut off from all help, all compassion. From the first sign to the final breath, the whole process took only 30 minutes. But Prince Prospero was bold, clever, and full of life. Seeing that half of his people had already died, he summoned 1,000 of his healthiest, most light-hearted friends, men and women from his court, and retreated with them to one of his fortified abbeys. It was a vast, lavish place of his own design, reflecting his taste for the extravagant and eccentric. A thick stone wall surrounded it, with tall iron gates. Once inside, the guests welded the locks shut with great furnaces and heavy hammers. They chose to seal themselves off from the outside world and all its horrors. The abbey was fully stocked. With such precautions, they felt safe from the disease. What was happening beyond those walls wasn't their concern. Inside, there was no need to fear the plague. The prince had filled his sanctuary with every kind of delight. There were jesters, improvisers, dancers, musicians, beauty in every form, and of course, there was wine. All these pleasures wrapped in complete safety. Outside, the Red Death continued to spread. Around the 5th or 6th day of seclusion, while the plague tore through the land beyond the gates, Prince Prospero hosted an elaborate masquerade ball for his guests. What a spectacle that masquerade was! Let me describe the rooms where it all took place. There were 7 imperial chambers arranged in a row. In most palaces, such a layout allows for a straight, unobstructed view from one end to the other, with aligned open doors that let you see all the way through. Here, things were very different, as one would expect from a prince with such a taste for the unusual. The rooms were arranged so irregularly that only one could be seen at a time. Every 20 or 30 feet, there was a sharp turn, and each turn brought an entirely different atmosphere. On each side of every room, and in the center walls too narrow, tall Gothic windows opened into a corridor that followed the twisting shape of the chambers. Each window was made of stained glass in a color that matched the dominant hue of the room's decor. For example, the room at the far western end was done in blue, and its windows glowed with vivid blue glass. The second room was purple, with windows of the same deep shade. The third room was entirely green, including the glass panes. The fourth was orange, blazing with matching light. The fifth was white. The sixth violet. The seventh room was completely draped in black velvet, covering walls and ceiling and trailing in heavy folds across a carpet of the same fabric and hue. But here, the windows were stained a deep, rich red, the color of fresh blood. None of these rooms had any lamps or chandeliers among the golden ornaments that filled every corner and lined the ceilings. There were no candles, no lanterns. Instead, in the outer hallways behind each window, stood a heavy tripod holding a bowl of burning coal. The light from these braziers filtered through the stained glass, casting vivid colors into each room and creating a wild play of shadow and glow. But in the seventh room, the black chamber with the blood-red windows, the effect was haunting. The fiery red light on the dark velvet walls gave such a ghastly tint to every face that entered. Hardly anyone dared to stay inside. In that same room stood a massive ebony clock, leaning against the eastern wall. Its pendulum swung with a dull, heavy, rhythmic talk, and every hour, when the hands aligned, the clock rang out with a deep, clear chime that echoed with a strangely musical resonance. Every time the clock struck, the orchestra would fall silent. Dancers froze mid-step. A strange hush would sweep across the room, and even the boldest guests would pale. The older ones would reach for their foreheads, as if lost in confused thoughts or strange dreams. But as soon as the last echo faded, light laughter would ripple through the crowd. The musicians would glance at each other and chuckle, a bit nervously, swearing under their breath they wouldn't be startled next time. But when the clock struck again, the same uneasy stillness returned. Even so, the party carried on joyful and dazzling. The prince's taste was peculiar, yet refined. He had an eye for colors and the moods they inspired. He didn't follow fashion. His designs were daring, theatrical, and brilliant with wild beauty. Some said he was insane, but his courtiers knew better. You had to see him in person, touch him even, to believe he hadn't gone mad. For this masquerade, the prince had personally overseen the decor and furnishings of each room, and it was his distinct taste that had dictated the style of the costumes. There was no doubt these masks were grotesque. Everything shimmered and glowed. There were wild, unexpected elements everywhere, like something you'd see later in a performance of Hernani. Grotesque arabesques, exaggerated in shape and ornament. Costumes that looked like fever dreams. Beauty and madness mingled freely, grace beside horror, elegance tangled with decay. It felt like an endless stream of dreams flowing back and forth through the 7 rooms. The dreams moved in all directions, absorbing the color of each chamber they entered. The strange rhythm of the orchestra seemed like it echoed their very footsteps. But then the ebony clock chimed, and in that instant, everything froze again. The music stopped, the dancing halted. All motion ceased, save for the deep toll of time. The echo lingered only a moment, and once it faded, laughter bubbled up again low, uneasy, and the music resumed. The dreams picked up where they left off, moving more freely than before, glittering in the flickering light of the colored glass and glowing embers. Still, no one dared enter the westernmost room, not as the night wore on. That final chamber, bathed in the blood-red light from the scarlet panes, its darkness deeper than shadows, was just ... wrong. And those who walked across its thick black carpets heard the ebony clock's chime even more deeply, more heavily, more soulfully than anyone else. Yet in the other 6 rooms, the party was in full swing. And then the clock struck midnight. As it had before, the music died, the dancers froze. But this time, a strange hush settled heavier than ever. The clock would toll 12 times. Its chimes stretched longer, louder, and deeper into the room than before, casting a strange weight across the guests. Maybe it was that deeper silence that allowed them to notice what they hadn't seen earlier. Maybe the echoes hadn't even finished when the whispers began. One person saw it, then another. The word passed from guest to guest, spreading quickly. A stranger had appeared, a masked figure that no one had seen enter. Someone ... wrong. And in a crowd as surreal and extravagant as this one, it took something truly shocking to stand out. But this figure, this costume, had gone beyond the boundaries of taste. The madness of the night had already stretched the limits of the bizarre. But this went further than even a prince as eccentric as Prospero could tolerate. Even the boldest among them could feel it, that this stranger had crossed a line. Some things just shouldn't be mocked. Not even here, not even now. The figure was tall and gaunt, wrapped head to toe in a burial shroud. Its mask was a perfect imitation of a stiff, decaying corpse, and not the theatrical kind. You could mistake it for the real thing. Even in a party full of ghouls and monsters, this was different. This wasn't dress up. But the final blow, the reason the crowd recoiled in horror, was that this guest had come dressed as the Red Death itself. Blood covered his robes. His face, and the mask that mimicked it, was smeared with the unmistakable marks of the plague. When Prince Prospero laid eyes on this specter, this silent, solemn, nightmarish figure gliding among the dancers, his body trembled with both horror and disgust. But in a moment, that terror turned to fury. "Who dares," he rasped, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Who dares insult us with this sick joke? Seize him! Strip off that mask so we can know who hides beneath it. And by morning, will decide his fate." Prince Prospero stood in the easternmost room, the Blue Room, when he spoke these words. His voice carried powerfully through the 7 halls, clear and commanding, for he was a strong-willed man, quick to act. With a sharp gesture, he'd brought the music to a stop. A group of pale courtiers stood near him. At first, as the prince gave his orders, they hesitated, stepping slightly in the direction of the figure. For a fleeting moment, the stranger seemed almost within reach, but he moved on slowly, deliberately walking straight toward the prince. And yet, something in that movement, something about the silence that clung to him, froze everyone in place. No one dared lift a hand to stop him. Even when he passed within arm's reach of the prince himself, no one acted. It was as if the entire room, as one body, drew back toward the walls, opening a path. The figure never hurried. He walked with the same unbending, solemn pace as before, moving from the Blue Room into the purple, from there into the green, then the orange, the white, the violet. Untouched, unchallenged. Prince Prospero, now burning with rage and humiliated by his own hesitation, surged forward through the 6 chambers. But none of the other guests followed. They were too afraid. He drew a dagger from beneath his cloak and closed the distance between himself and the figure. But as the stranger reached the edge of the Black Room, the final chamber, he turned suddenly to face the prince. A sharp cry rang out. The dagger slipped from Prospero's hand and fell onto the dark carpet with a dull thud. In the same instant, the prince collapsed dead before he hit the floor. Then, as if jolted by desperation, the masked revelers surged into the Black Room, rushing toward the figure that stood motionless beneath the great ebony clock. They grabbed him, pulled at the funeral shroud, and the cold mask but gasped in horror. There was nothing underneath. No face, no form, no body at all. Only the shroud, only the mask, and only silence. It was then they understood. The Red Death had come, not as a costume, not as a cruel joke. It had entered the abbey like a shadow in the night, and one by one, they fell where they danced, where they drank, where they laughed, collapsing in blood, in fear and in silence. And in the end, the ebony clock stopped. The braziers flickered out. Darkness, decay, and the Red Death held dominion over all.